The morning fog clung to Napa Valley like a whispered secret wrapping around the ancient oak trees that lined the entrance to Chateau Marguerite. Elena Rossi pressed her palm against the cool window of the shuttle bus, watching the vineyards roll past in endless green waves. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not from nerves she told herself, but from the caffeine. 3 espressos before dawn had seemed like a good idea in her cramped Portland apartment. Now surrounded by sommelier candidates who looked like they'd stepped out of Wine Spectator magazine, she questioned everything. First time at Nationals, the voice belonged to a woman with silver hair pulled into an elegant chignon. Her name tag read Patricia Williams Judge. Elena recognized the name immediately, former master sommelier wine writer living legend. Yes, ma'am? Elena's voice came out smaller than intended. Patricia's eyes crinkled with what might have been amusement. I can smell the terror from here. It's mixing poorly with your perfume. Elena's cheeks burned. She wasn't wearing perfume, just the lingering scent of the olive oil soap her mother made infused with rosemary from their tiny garden. I'm sorry, I don't apologize. Patricia settled into the seat beside her. Fear keeps you sharp. Overconfidence is what kills promising careers. Through the window, Elena caught her first glimpse of the competition venue. Chateau Marguerite rose from the valley floor like something from a fairy tale, all weathered stone and climbing ivy. The morning sun painted its walls gold, and for a moment, Elena forgot to breathe. Beautiful, isn't it? Patricia followed her gaze. Built in 1889 by a French immigrant who wanted to prove that California could produce wines worthy of Bordeaux. He died before he could see his first vintage mature. Did he succeed? Elena asked. That depends on who you ask. Patricia's smile held secrets, and what you believe success means. The shuttle crunched to a stop on gravel that had probably been walked by a century of dreamers. Elena shouldered her worn leather messenger bag, a gift from her mother before the memory problem started, when she still remembered that Elena was chasing something bigger than their small world. The lobby buzzed with controlled chaos. Candidates clustered in nervous groups, their conversations a symphony of wine terminology that made Elena's head spin. Tannins and terroir, malolactic fermentation, and minerality words that rolled off tongues with practiced ease. She caught fragments. The 2018 Burgundies are showing exceptional. Blind tasted a Chenin Blanc that completely fooled me into thinking Chablis. My mentor always said the nose tells you everything if you know how to listen. Elena clutched her registration packet tighter. She'd learned wine tasting in the storage room of Murphy's Wine Bar, surrounded by cases of bottles that cost more than her rent. No mentor, no formal training, just her and YouTube videos, and an obsessive need to understand why certain wines made her mother smile in a way that reminded Elena of the woman she used to be. Elena Rossi, she turned to find a young man with a clipboard and the stressed expression of someone responsible for herding very expensive cats. That's me. Great, I'm David, one of the coordinators. Here's your schedule and room assignment. Opening ceremony is in 20 minutes, followed by the written examination. He glanced at her bag, then at the sleek, rolling cases surrounding them. Do you need help getting your things to your room? This is everything, Elena said, patting her bag. David's eyebrows rose fractionally. Oh, well, the elevators are just past registration if you want to freshen up. Elena watched him hurry away, probably to assist someone whose luggage matched their professional aspirations. She studied her schedule, 5 days, 5 rounds of elimination. 60 candidates would become 30, then 15, then 5, then 2. The final prize, $500,000, and a title that would open doors she'd only dreamed of walking through. The elevator carried her to the 3rd floor in blessed silence. Her room was small but elegant, with a view of the vineyards that stretched toward the mountains. She sat on the bed and pulled out her phone. Hi, Mom. Elena, her mother's voice sounded distant, confused. Where are you, sweetheart? I'm in California. Remember the wine competition I told you about? A pause. Oh, yes, the thing with the grapes. Elena's throat tightened. 6 months ago, her mother would have asked detailed questions, would have worried about Elena driving alone, would have made her promise to call every day. Now there were good days and bad days, and Elena had learned to treasure the moments when recognition flickered in those familiar green eyes. I love you, Mom. I love you too, baby. Be safe. Elena ended the call and sat in the quiet, letting herself feel the weight of why she was here. The memory care facility cost more than Elena made in a year. The wine bar barely paid enough to cover her mother's medications. This competition, this impossible, terrifying competition, was her only shot at changing their story. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find a man about her age, tall and lean, with dark hair and the kind of confidence that came from never doubting you belonged exactly where you were. His clothes were expensive, but understated the uniform of someone who didn't need to prove anything to anyone. "Wrong room," he said, checking the number on his keycard. "I'm looking for 347. "That's next door," Elena pointed down the hallway. "Thanks." He paused, studying her face with eyes that reminded her of good whiskey amber with flecks of gold. "I'm Marcus Chen." The name hit her like a slap. Marcus Chen. Bum. The golden boy of San Francisco's wine scene. Master Sommelier candidate at 28. Regular contributor to Wine and Spirits magazine. The man whose blind tasting videos had taught her everything she knew about identifying wine by scent alone. "Elena Rossi," she managed. His smile was polite professional. "Good luck in there." She watched him disappear into his room, then closed her door and leaned against it. Of all the people to meet first, it had to be Marcus Chen. The man she'd studied like a textbook, whose techniques she'd copied in her cramped apartment kitchen, measuring out tiny pours of wine she couldn't afford while her mother slept. The opening ceremony took place in the chateau's great hall beneath a vaulted ceiling painted with fading murals of harvest scenes. Elena found a seat in the back, surrounded by candidates who looked like they'd been born holding wine glasses. She spotted Marcus 3 rows ahead, his posture perfect, taking notes in a leather-bound journal. Patricia Williams took the stage, commanding attention without effort. "Welcome to the National Sommelier Championship. You represent the finest wine professionals in the country. Over the next 5 days, we'll test not just your knowledge, but your palate, your service skills, and your ability to think under pressure." Elena's hands were damp with sweat. She wiped them on her black slacks, the nicest pants she owned, purchased specifically for this event. "The first elimination begins in 30 minutes, Patricia continued. "A written examination covering viticulture, wine regions, service protocols, and food pairing. You'll have 2 hours. The bottom 30 candidates will be sent home tonight." A collective intake of breath swept the room. Elena closed her eyes and summoned every fact she'd memorized, every detail she'd absorbed from borrowed textbooks and late-night internet research. She thought of her mother's face when she'd first tasted a glass of Sancerre, the way her eyes had widened with delight, the way she'd said, "It tastes like morning in the garden." That was why Elena was here. Not for the prestige or the career opportunities, but for the moments when wine became a bridge between souls, when flavor awakened memory, when a perfect glass could transport someone beyond the confines of a failing body. The examination room was silent, except for the scratch of pens on paper and the occasional rustle of turning pages. Elena read each question carefully, forcing herself not to rush. Describe the primary soil types of champagne and their influence on wine character. Outline the proper service sequence for a 7-course wine dinner. Compare the characteristics of Sangiovese grown in Tuscany versus its expressions in other regions. The questions blurred together, but her hand moved steadily across the page. She'd learned these facts in stolen moments during lunch breaks, at the wine bar, in the pre-dawn hours before her mother woke on the bus rides to the care facility where she spent her weekends. With 15 minutes remaining, Elena allowed herself a glance around the room. Some candidates were already finished, sitting back with the confidence of people who'd never doubted their answers. Others looked panicked, frantically scribbling last-minute thoughts. Marcus was 3 seats ahead, and to her left, his movements controlled and deliberate as he reviewed his work. Elena returned to her paper and read through her answers one final time. Her handwriting was neat, but hurried, her responses thorough but concise. She'd either passed or failed. There was no middle ground in a competition like this. "Time!" The collective exhale was audible. Elena set down her pen and flexed her cramped fingers, watching as proctors collected the exams with the efficiency of people accustomed to determining fates. "Results will be posted at 8 p.m., Patricia announced. "Dinner is served in the main dining room. I suggest you use this time to get to know your fellow candidates. Half of you won't be here tomorrow." The dining room hummed with nervous energy. Elena filled her plate with items she recognized: roasted chicken, seasonal vegetables, a simple salad, and found an empty table near the windows. The sun was setting over the vineyards, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold that reminded her of her favorite Provence rosé. Mind if I join you? She looked up to find a man with red hair and an easy smile holding a plate piled high with food. His name tag read Jake Murphy, New York. Please. Elena gestured to the empty chair across from her. Jake sat down with a theatrical sigh. Well, that was humbling. I've been studying for 6 months and I'm pretty sure I just confused Burgundy with Bordeaux on at least 3 questions. Elena laughed despite her nerves. I wrote an entire paragraph about Nebbiolo before realizing the question was about Sangiovese. Ouch! Jake raised his water glass. To spectacular failures in the stories they'll make. They clinked glasses and Elena felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Jake was from Brooklyn, had worked his way up from server to sommelier at a restaurant group she'd heard of, but never imagined she could afford. His stories were peppered with self-deprecating humor and genuine passion for wine that reminded Elena why she'd fallen in love with this world in the first place. So, what's your story? Jake asked between bites of chicken. You have that hungry look like you're here for more than just career advancement. Elena hesitated. She'd practiced her elevator pitch, the professional version of her journey that highlighted her achievements without mentioning the desperation driving them. But something about Jake's open expression made her want to be honest. My mom, she said simply. Her memory is going. Wine is one of the few things that still reaches her. I want to understand it well enough to help her hold on to those moments a little longer. Jake's expression softened. That's beautiful. And heartbreaking. It's practical, Elena said, though even she didn't believe it. The prize money would help with her care. Sure, Jake agreed, but you could make good money as a sommelier without winning this thing. This is about something more. Before Elena could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Marcus Chen had entered with a small group of candidates, all carrying themselves with the easy confidence of people accustomed to being the smartest ones in the room. Elena watched as he moved through the dining room, shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, clearly in his element. That's Marcus Chen, Jake said, following her gaze. Legend in the making. They say he can identify a wine's vintage and vineyard from a single sip. Have you met him? Briefly, nice enough, but you get the feeling he's calculating the competition even when he's being friendly. Jake studied Elena's face. You know him? Not exactly. Elena took a sip of water. I've studied his technique. He's very good. Good enough to win this thing. Elena watched Marcus lean in to listen to something another candidate was saying, his attention complete and focused. Even from across the room, she could sense the intelligence radiating from him, the kind of deep knowledge that came from years of formal training and natural talent. Probably, she admitted. Jake followed her gaze, then looked back at her with a speculative expression. Interesting. What's interesting, the way you're watching him, like you're trying to solve a puzzle. Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm just observing the competition. Uh-huh. Jake's grin was knowing. Well, for what it's worth, I think you've got as good a shot as anyone. There's something about you like you taste wine with your soul instead of just your palate. The comment stayed with Elena through the rest of dinner and the anxious wait for results. At 8 p.m. sharp, a crowd gathered around the bulletin board in the lobby. Elena hung back, letting the confident ones push forward first. She'd know soon enough. Elena Rossi, she turned to find Marcus behind her, looking as composed as ever, despite the tension crackling through the room. Congratulations, he said. You made it through. Elena blinked. How do you... I saw the list. Your name's in the top 15. His smile was genuine, and Elena noticed for the first time that he had a small scar through his left eyebrow. That's impressive for someone without formal training. How did you know I don't have formal training? Marcus's expression became carefully neutral. Lucky guess. The crowd around the bulletin board was beginning to thin, some candidates celebrating, others walking away with the defeated posture of dreams deferred. Elena finally pushed forward to see for herself. Her name was their 14th out of 30 remaining candidates. Relief flooded through her so suddenly that her knees almost buckled. She'd survived the first cut. Congratulations. Patricia Williams appeared beside her, studying the list with satisfaction. Though I should warn you, tomorrow's round will separate the professionals from the passionate amateurs. Elena met her gaze steadily. What makes you think I'm an amateur? Patricia's smile was enigmatic. Nothing at all. That's what makes tomorrow interesting. As the crowd dispersed, Elena found herself walking toward the elevator beside Marcus. They rode up in silence, the weight of competition settling between them like a tangible thing. Elena, he said as the elevator stopped at her floor. She paused in the doorway. Yes. Tomorrow's blind tasting round, it's not just about identifying the wines. They're looking for how you think, how you approach the unknown. His amber eyes were serious. Trust your instincts. They got you this far. The elevator doors closed before she could respond, leaving Elena alone in the hallway, with the strange sensation that Marcus Chen had just given her advice that might help her beat him. In her room, Elena called her mother again. The phone rang 6 times before a tired voice answered, not her mother's, but Maria, the night nurse. How is she tonight? Elena asked. Restless. She keeps asking about someone named Elena, whether she's safe. Elena's throat tightened. Even when her mother couldn't remember where she was or what year it was, some part of her still worried about her daughter. Tell her I'm safe, Elena said. Tell her I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. She hung up and sat by the window looking out at the vineyards bathed in moonlight. Somewhere in those rows of vines was the story of every wine she'd ever tasted, every moment of connection she'd shared with her mother over a perfectly paired glass. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new chances to prove she belonged here. But tonight, for the first time in months, Elena Rossi felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. The morning of round 2 dawned crisp and clear, the kind of October day that made California wine country look like a painting. Elena woke before her alarm dressed in her one good blazer, navy blue, purchased secondhand but still sharp, and made her way to the breakfast room. Jake was already there, looking slightly green around the edges. Nerves or the wine from dinner? Elena asked, sliding into the seat across from him. Both. He pushed scrambled eggs around his plate without eating them. I keep thinking about what Patricia said, that today separates professionals from amateurs. What if I'm just a really passionate amateur? Then you're in good company, Elena said, though she felt the same knot of anxiety in her stomach. The blind tasting would take place in the chateau's cellar, a stone-vaulted space that had been converted into a professional tasting room. 30 stations were set up with identical glasses, water pitchers, and notebooks. The lighting was perfect, the temperature controlled the atmosphere reverent as a cathedral. Elena found her assigned station number 14, matching her rank from yesterday, and tried to steady her breathing. To her left sat a woman with silver hair and intimidating focus. To her right, Jake fidgeted with his pen. 3 stations ahead, Marcus Chen sat with the stillness of someone completely in control. Patricia Williams addressed the room from the front, her voice carrying easily in the stone space. You have 6 wines before you. 20 minutes per wine, 2 hours total. Identify the grape variety, region, vintage if possible, and provide tasting notes. Remember, we're not just looking for correct answers. We want to understand your thought process. Elena stared at the 6 glasses before her, each covered with a watch glass to preserve the aromatics. 6 unknowns that would determine whether she advanced or went home. She thought of her mother's face, of the way wine had always been a bridge between them, and reached for the first glass. The wine was pale gold, with green highlights, its legs sliding slowly down the glass sides. Elena brought it to her nose and inhaled deeply, letting the aromatics tell their story. Citrus, lemon, and lime. Stone fruit. A mineral note that reminded her of wet rocks after rain. And underneath it all, a grassy quality that spoke of cool climate and careful winemaking. Sauvignon Blanc, she wrote. Loire Valley, possibly Sancerre. The minerality suggests limestone soils. 2019 or 2020 vintage. She tasted, letting the wine coat her palate. Bright acidity, medium body, a clean finish that lingered just long enough. The grassy notes were prominent, but balanced, the fruit focused, but not overwhelming. Classic Sancerre profile, she continued writing. Would pair beautifully with goat cheese or shellfish. Shows restraint and terroir expression over manipulation. The 20-minute bell chimed, and Elena moved to the second glass. This one was deeper gold, almost amber in the light. The nose was more complex, honey-dried apricots, a waxy quality that made her think of age. When she tasted it, richness flooded her palate, but balanced by acidity that kept it from being cloying. Chenin Blanc, she wrote, but hesitated over the region. The honey notes could suggest botrytis. The richness pointed to Loire Valley, but something about the mouthfeel made her think of South Africa. She went with her instinct, possibly Vouvray, but the texture suggests South African Chenin Blanc. Stellenbosch region, 2017. As she moved through the wines, Elena felt herself settling into a rhythm. A red wine that screamed Pinot Noir from its pale color and cherry aromatics. Oregon, she decided based on the earthiness. A bold red with grippy tannins and dark fruit that could only be young Cabernet Sauvignon, probably Napa Valley. A wine so pale it was almost pink with strawberry and mineral notes that whispered Provence rosé. The final glass was the most challenging. The wine was medium-bodied and red with aromatics that seemed to shift every time she returned to them. Cherry and earth, yes, but also leather and tobacco, a complexity that spoke of age and careful cellaring. The acidity was bright but not sharp, and then tannins resolved but still present. Elena closed her eyes and tasted again, trying to quiet the analytical part of her mind and let intuition guide her. The wine felt familiar somehow, like a half-remembered song. And then it hit her. This was the same wine she'd shared with her mother on her last birthday when she'd still been living at home. A Sangiovese from Tuscany, but not just any Sangiovese. This had the elegance and complexity of Brunello di Montalcino. Brunello di Montalcino, she wrote. 2015 vintage. Estate bottling, possibly from the Montalcino village area. Shows classic Sangiovese character, but with the power and elegance that only comes from the best sites in patient winemaking. She added detailed tasting notes describing the way the wine evolved in the glass, the interplay between fruit and earth, the long finish that seemed to echo the Tuscan hills where the grapes had grown. Time. Elena set down her pen with shaking hands. Around the room, candidates were sliding their papers into manila envelopes, sealing their fates with their final answers. She noticed Marcus finishing with the same methodical precision he'd shown the day before, while Jake looked like he'd been through a war. Results at 6 p.m., Patricia announced. Until then, I suggest you enjoy the chateau's hospitality and try not to second-guess yourselves. Elena walked out into the afternoon sunshine feeling drained, but oddly exhilarated. She'd trusted her palate, her instincts, her hard-won knowledge, gained in moments stolen from a life that had never made room for dreams this big. The courtyard was filled with candidates decompressing from the morning's intensity. Some had already formed alliances, clustering in groups that spoke of shared backgrounds and mutual recognition. Others, like Elena, wandered alone processing what had just happened. She found a quiet bench in the herb garden and pulled out her phone to call her mother, but before she could dial, a shadow fell across her. Mind if I sit? Marcus Chen stood beside the bench, looking less composed than she'd ever seen him. His hair was slightly mussed, his expensive shirt wrinkled at the cuffs. It's a free country, Elena said, then immediately regretted the defensive tone. Marcus sat down, leaving careful space between them. For a moment, they sat in silence, watching other candidates pace the courtyard like caged animals. That was brutal, he said finally. The Chenin Blanc. Marcus turned to look at her, surprise flickering across his features. You caught that too, the South African versus Loire thing. Elena nodded. The texture was wrong for Vouvray. Too rich, but not in a botrytis way. Exactly. Marcus's smile was the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. I went back and forth for 5 minutes. Finally decided on Stellenbosch based on the mouthfeel. They discussed the other wines, finding surprising agreement on most of their identifications. Elena discovered that beneath his polished exterior, Marcus had the same obsessive attention to detail that drove her own wine studies. When he talked about the Brunello, his eyes lit up with genuine passion. That wine was singing, he said. Did you catch the way it opened after 10 minutes in the quiz like it was waking up from a long sleep? It reminded me of something my mother always said, Elena found herself saying, that the best wines have stories to tell if you know how to listen. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Is your mother in the wine business? No. Elena's voice was soft. She loved wine. Loved the way it could transport you somewhere else, even if just for a moment. Loved, Elena realized what she'd revealed and felt her walls slam back into place. She has memory problems. Wine is one of the few things that still reaches her. Marcus's expression grew serious. I'm sorry, that must be difficult. It's why I'm here, Elena said, though she wasn't sure why she was telling him this. The prize money would help with her care. And the title? Elena considered the question. The title would prove that someone like me, someone without pedigree or formal training, can understand wine just as deeply as someone who learned it in fancy schools. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying his hands. You know, he said finally, formal training isn't everything. Some of the most knowledgeable wine people I know learned by following their passion, not a curriculum. Is that supposed to make me feel better about being your competition? Marcus laughed, a genuine sound that transformed his face completely. Maybe I'm the one who should be worried about the competition. The late afternoon sun slanted through the garden, casting everything in golden light that reminded Elena of white wine held up to windows. She found herself studying Marcus's profile as he watched the other candidates, noting the way concentration creased his brow, the careful control he maintained even in casual conversation. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure. Yesterday, when you gave me advice about trusting my instincts, why did you do that?" Marcus was quiet for so long that Elena thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. "Because I've watched your technique. The way you approach wine, it's intuitive in a way that can't be taught. That's rare. But I'm your competition." "You are." He turned to meet her eyes. "But wine isn't just about competition. It's about connection, about understanding something beautiful and complex. If you advance because you deserve to, then I'd rather lose to someone who truly gets that than win against people who are just going through the motions." Elena felt something shift between them, a recognition that went beyond professional respect. Before she could examine it too closely, Jake appeared at the garden entrance, his red hair catching the sunlight. "There you are," he called out. "Results are up early. They decided not to torture us for another hour." Elena's stomach dropped. She and Marcus rose simultaneously, walking toward the chateau with the measured pace of people trying not to run. The crowd around the bulletin board was smaller this time. Some candidates had clearly chosen not to torture themselves with public revelation of their fate. Elena pushed through to the front, scanning the list with her heart hammering against her ribs. Her name was there. 7th place out of 15 remaining candidates. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by a surge of pride. She'd moved up 7 spots based purely on her palate and knowledge. No connections, no formal training, just the skills she'd built, one glass at a time. "Congratulations." She turned to find Marcus beside her, his name holding steady at 3rd place. His smile seemed genuinely pleased for her success. "You too," she said, "though I'm not sure congratulating each other is the smartest strategy." "Probably not," Marcus agreed. "Want to celebrate anyway? There's supposed to be a reception tonight, but I was thinking of exploring the vineyard instead. Get some air before tomorrow's service round." Elena knew she should say no. Marcus Chen was competition, possibly the biggest threat to her advancement. Spending time with him was strategically stupid and emotionally dangerous because despite every rational reason to keep her distance, she found herself wanting to say yes. "I should call my mother first," she said. "Of course. Meet me at the north entrance in an hour." Elena nodded, watching him walk away with that easy confidence that seemed so natural to him. She was definitely making a mistake. But as she headed to her room to make her phone call, she couldn't quite bring herself to care. The evening was warm, the kind of perfect California night that made Elena understand why people moved here and never left. She found Marcus waiting by the north entrance, as promised, changed from his formal clothes into jeans and a sweater that made him look younger, more approachable. "How's your mother?" he asked as they started walking toward the vineyard. "Good day," Elena said. She remembered that I was competing for something important. Told me to show them what Rossi women are made of. Sounds like wise advice. They walked between the rows of vines heavy with late-season grapes, the leaves beginning their autumn transformation from green to gold. The air smelled of earth and fruit and the faint smokiness that came with harvest season. "Is this your first nationals?" Elena asked. "Second time. I made it to the final 5 2 years ago." "What happened?" Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I overthought everything. Got so caught up in proving I belonged there that I forgot why I loved wine in the first place." Elena glanced at him. "And why do you love wine?" "Same reason you do, I think." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her. "Because it's honest. Wine can't lie about where it came from, how it was made, whether the winemaker cared about it. Every bottle tells the truth about its origins. The sincerity in his voice surprised her. This wasn't the polished professional she'd expected, but someone who understood wine the way she did as something larger than career advancement or social status. "That's why you gave me advice yesterday," Elena said, understanding dawning. "Because you recognize that in me." "Well, because I recognize it in you," Marcus corrected. "The way you tasted that Brunello today, you weren't just identifying it. You were having a conversation with it." They resumed walking, their footsteps muffled by the soft earth between the vine rows. Overhead stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, and Elena felt a strange sensation of existing in a perfect moment that she wanted to stretch indefinitely. "Tomorrow's service round," Marcus said. "Have you worked fine dining? Does Murphy's wine bar count as fine dining?" Marcus's laugh was warm. "Depends on Murphy's standards." Elena smiled despite herself. "I'm nervous about it. I can identify wine and talk about terroir all day, but serving a full wine dinner to judges who've seen everything, that's different. The technical stuff you can learn, but service is really about reading people, understanding what they need before they know it themselves. I have a feeling you're better at that than you think." They'd reached the end of the vineyard, where the land sloped down toward a small pond that reflected the emerging stars. Marcus sat on a low stone wall, and after a moment's hesitation, Elena joined him. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "I've been studying your technique for months. Those tasting videos you posted for wine and spirits, I must have watched them 100 times. Marcus looked genuinely surprised. "Those old things, I was so green then. You taught me how to taste methodically, how to break down a wine's components instead of just reacting to it." Elena picked up a small stone and turned it over in her hands. "I learned more from watching you work through a Barolo than I did from any textbook." That's, Marcus seemed to struggle for words. "That's the nicest compliment anyone's ever given me about my work. It's just the truth." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds of the vineyard, the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze, the distant laughter from the chateau, the soft splash of something small entering the pond. "Elena," Marcus said finally, "tomorrow when we're competing." "I know." She met his eyes. "Tonight doesn't change anything. We're still competition." "I'm glad we had tonight, though." Elena felt something flutter in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with wine and everything to do with the way Marcus was looking at her in the starlight. This was dangerous territory, the kind of emotional complication that could derail everything she'd worked for. But when he reached over and gently took the stone from her hands, their fingers brushing in the transfer, she didn't pull away. "We should head back," she said, though she made no move to stand. "We should," Marcus agreed, but he didn't move either. They might have sat there longer, might have crossed a line that would have changed everything, but the distant sound of her phone ringing from her jacket pocket broke the spell. Elena reluctantly stood and answered. "Elena." It was Maria, the night nurse, and her voice was tight with concern. "What's wrong?" "Your mother had an episode tonight. She became agitated, asking for you, saying she needed to tell you something important about wine. The doctor has sedated her, but she was very insistent that I call you." Elena's heart clenched. "Is she okay?" "She's resting now." "But Elena," she kept saying something about a Brunello, something about how you'd understand what it meant. Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The Brunello from the tasting that morning, it was the same wine she'd shared with her mother on her birthday, the last bottle from her father's small collection. Her mother must have somehow remembered, must have connected the taste memory to Elena's competition. "I'll catch the first flight home," Elena said. "Elena, wait." Marcus was standing now, concern creasing his features. "What happened?" She ended the call and looked at him. This man who'd somehow become important to her in the space of 2 days, knowing that everything was about to change again. "I have to go home," she said. "My mother needs me." The walk back to the chateau passed in a blur. Marcus tried to convince her to wait until morning, to at least finish the competition, but Elena's mind was made up. Her mother had reached through the fog of her illness to send a message, and Elena wasn't going to ignore it. In her room, she threw her few belongings into her bag while Marcus stood in the doorway, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. "Elena, please," he said finally. Just think about this for a minute. You've worked so hard to get here. And my mother comes first. Elena's voice was steady, but her hands shook as she folded her blazer. She always has. I understand that, but what if Marcus stopped himself, running a hand through his hair? What if I drove you to the airport in the morning? You could catch the first flight, spend the day with her, and fly back tomorrow night. The service round isn't until Wednesday. Elena paused in her packing. Why would you do that? Because. Marcus looked down at his hands and back at her. Because I think you deserve to finish this. Because walking away now would haunt you forever. And because your mother raised someone who fights for what she believes in, she wouldn't want you to give up your dreams for her. The words hit Elena like a physical blow, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. Her mother, even in her diminished state, had always been her fiercest champion. The woman who had worked double shifts to pay for Elena's community college courses, who had encouraged her to chase opportunities that seemed impossible. I can't risk it, Elena said quietly. What if something happens while I'm gone? What if something happens while you're here? Marcus stepped into the room, and his expression gentle but determined. Elena, your mother sent you a message tonight. She remembered the Brunello, remembered that you're here competing. Don't you think she'd want you to see this through? Elena sank onto the bed, her bag half-packed beside her. I'm scared, she admitted, not of the competition, of losing her while I'm chasing something that might not even matter. Marcus sat down beside her, careful to maintain distance, but close enough that she could feel his warmth. What if I told you that you matter? That what you're doing here, it's not just about loan or money or titles. You're proving that passion and dedication can triumph over privilege and pedigree. That's important. You don't understand. You've never had to choose between your dreams and the people you love. Haven't I? Marcus's voice was quiet. You think I'm here because my family supports my career. My father wanted me to go into business to take over the restaurant empire he built. Every day I spend pursuing wine instead of quarterly profits is a choice between my dreams and family expectations. Elena looked at him, really looked, and saw something she'd missed before. Beneath the polished exterior was someone who understood the weight of carrying other people's hopes and fears. It's not the same thing, she said, but the fight had gone out of her voice. No, it's not. Your sacrifice is bigger, more personal. But Elena, Marcus turned to face her fully. What if honoring your mother means finishing what you started? What if the best way to love her is to become the person she always believed you could be? Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Maria. She's sleeping peacefully. Doctor says episode was likely triggered by excitement, not distress. She kept smiling and saying, my Elena knows good wine. The message broke something loose in Elena's chest. Her mother wasn't afraid or in pain. She was proud. Proud enough to reach through the fog of her illness to connect with Elena's journey. One condition, Elena said finally. If anything changes with my mother, I leave immediately. No questions, no arguments. Marcus's smile was radiant. Deal. And we don't talk about tonight. Tomorrow we're competitors again. Understood. But as Marcus left her room, Elena knew that something fundamental had shifted between them. The careful boundaries of competition had blurred into something more complicated, more dangerous, and infinitely more real. The next morning dawned gray and drizzly, the kind of weather that made the vineyard look moody and romantic. Elena had barely slept, torn between relief at staying and anxiety about her mother. She made it to breakfast early, hoping to avoid the speculation that would surely follow if word got out about her near departure. Jake was already there, nursing what looked like his third cup of coffee. You look like hell, he said cheerfully. Late night. Something like that. Elena poured herself coffee and sat across from him. Nervous about today, the service round would test their ability to guide diners through a wine experience, explaining selections, managing a wine list, handling difficult customers. It was the most practical of all the challenges, designed to simulate real-world sommelier work. Terrified, Jake admitted. I can identify wine all day, but put me in front of a table of food critics with unlimited expense accounts, I turn into a stammering idiot. Elena was about to respond when Marcus entered the dining room. Their eyes met briefly across the space, and she felt that flutter in her chest again. But his expression was carefully neutral, professional. The return to competition mode. Good morning, he said, stopping by their table. Ready for today? As ready as we'll ever be, Jake replied. You tell him. Looking forward to it. Marcus's gaze flicked to Elena. Service is where you really see someone's passion for wine. It's not just about knowledge, it's about sharing that knowledge in a way that enhances someone's experience. Elena heard the message beneath his words. He was reminding her why she was here, what she was fighting for. Not just the money or the title, but the chance to use wine as a bridge between people the way she'd always done with her mother. The service round took place in the chateau's formal dining room, which had been set up to simulate a high-end restaurant. Each candidate would serve 3 tables of judges, presenting wine pairings for a 4-course meal, handling special requests, and demonstrating their ability to enhance the dining experience. Elena drew the second time slot, which meant watching the first candidate, a stern-faced woman from Chicago, navigate the challenge with clinical precision. She was technically flawless, but cold treating the judges more like an examination board than guests she wanted to delight. Candidate number 2, Elena Rossi, Patricia Williams announced. Elena approached the first table where 3 judges sat with menus and expectant expressions. She recognized one as James Hendricks, a renowned food critic whose reviews could make or break restaurants. Good afternoon, Elena said, allowing warmth to color her voice. I'm Elena, and I'll be guiding you through your wine selections today. Have you had a chance to review the menu? The conversation flowed naturally from there. Elena found herself relaxing into the role, drawing on years of experience at Murphy's Wine Bar, where she'd learned to read customers, to understand what they wanted even when they couldn't articulate it themselves. When Judge Hendricks mentioned he usually avoided red wine with fish, Elena suggested a light Pinot Noir from Oregon that would complement the salmon without overwhelming it. Interesting choice, Hendricks said after tasting. I wouldn't have thought to pair this. The key is thinking about the preparation, not just the protein, Elena explained. The way they're treating this salmon with that herb crust and the earthy mushroom sauce, it can handle more body than a simple preparation would. The Pinot Noir has enough structure to stand up to those flavors while maintaining the elegance that won't compete with the fish. Hendricks made a note, nodding appreciatively. The second table presented a different challenge, a couple celebrating an anniversary who wanted something special and romantic. Elena found herself telling the story of the champagne she selected, how the small producer had been making wine for 5 generations, how each bottle represented a family's dedication to perfection. That's beautiful, the female judge said, clearly moved. You made us feel like we're part of something bigger. That's what great wine does, Elena replied. It connects us to the land, to the people who made it, to the moments we share. The final table was the most challenging. The judges presented themselves as difficult customers, demanding impatient, impossible to please. Elena drew on every ounce of patience she'd learned dealing with entitled customers at the wine bar, every lesson in grace under pressure her mother had taught her. When one judge complained that the Riesling was too sweet, it wasn't Elena smoothly offered to replace it with a drier option while explaining the wine's structure in a way that educated without condescending. When another insisted that red wine should never be chilled, certain light reds absolutely should be. Elena acknowledged his preference while gently sharing why a slight chill could enhance the wine's freshness. Time, Patricia announced. Elena walked out of the dining room feeling cautiously optimistic. She'd navigated every challenge thrown at her, but more importantly, she'd remembered why she loved this work. Wine wasn't just about technical knowledge. It was about creating moments of connection, about helping people discover something new about themselves through taste. The afternoon break stretched endlessly. Candidates wandered the chateau grounds, some confident, others clearly rattled by the morning's challenges. Elena found herself in the library, a quiet room lined with wine books and comfortable leather chairs. She was deep in thought when Marcus appeared in the doorway. "How did it go?" he asked. "Good, I think. You?" "Same." Marcus sat in the chair across from her. The judges seemed engaged, asked good follow-up questions. They sat in comfortable silence, the weight of competition temporarily suspended. Outside the window, the vineyards stretched toward mountains shrouded in low clouds. "Thank you," Elena said suddenly, "for last night, for helping me see that staying was the right choice. You don't need to thank me, you made the decision. But you helped me understand what my mother would want. That matters." Marcus studied her face. "Have you called her today?" This morning, she was having a good day. Remembered my name, asked about the wine people I was meeting. Elena smiled. Maria said she spent an hour yesterday trying to describe the taste of that Brunello to the other residents. She sounds like an incredible woman. She is, or was. It's hard to know which tense to use anymore. Both, Marcus said firmly. She's still incredible, just in a different way. The simple statement hit Elena with unexpected force. She'd been so focused on what her mother was losing that she'd forgotten to appreciate what remained the core of love and strength that no illness could touch. Results in an hour, she said, glancing at her watch. Nervous, terrified, yakayin. You, Marcus's smile was rueful. Same. Though I have a feeling you did better than you think. When results were posted, Elena's instinct proved correct. She jumped to fourth place while Marcus held steady at second. Jake had also advanced his natural warmth, overcoming his technical nervousness. 15 candidates had become 8. The celebration dinner that night was subdued, everyone acutely aware that tomorrow would bring the team challenge pairs of candidates working together to create a wine program for a hypothetical restaurant. The partnerships would be announced in the morning, and Elena went to bed wondering who she'd be working with, hoping it wouldn't be someone who would see her background as a liability. She found out the next morning when Patricia read the pairings aloud in the Great Hall. Team 4, Elena Rossi and Marcus Chen. Elena's heart stopped. Of all the possible combinations, this was the most complicated. Working with Marcus meant spending the entire day in close collaboration, finding ways to blend their different approaches into something cohesive. It meant pretending that the growing attraction between them didn't exist while creating something beautiful together. Marcus caught her eye from across the room, his expression unreadable. When the meeting broke up, he approached her with characteristic directness. Well, he said, this should be interesting. Interesting is one word for it. We need to talk strategy, coffee. They found a quiet corner of the courtyard armed with notebooks and the competition brief. Their assignment: create a wine program for a new restaurant, concept farm-to-table American cuisine with global influences, mid to upscale pricing, focus on sustainability, and local sourcing. Okay, Marcus said, all business. First thoughts. Elena had been thinking about this since breakfast. The wine list needs to reflect the restaurant's values. If they're sourcing locally and focusing on sustainability, the wine program should do the same. California producers who use organic or biodynamic practices, smaller family operations that align with the farm-to-table ethos. Exactly what I was thinking. But we also need to consider the global influences in the cuisine. Maybe some natural wines from France, organic producers from Italy. They worked through the morning, building a wine list that told a story. Each selection had a reason, a connection to the restaurant's mission and the dining experience they wanted to create. Elena found herself impressed by Marcus's knowledge of smaller producers, while he seemed to appreciate her instinct for which wines would appeal to diners who might be intimidated by an overly esoteric list. What about pricing structure? Elena asked, reviewing their selections. That's where your experience shows, Marcus admitted. I've always worked in places where price wasn't the primary consideration. You understand value in a way I'm still learning. Elena looked up from her notes, surprised by the admission. You're asking my opinion? I'm recognizing your expertise. There's a difference. The sincerity in his voice made something warm unfurl in Elena's chest. This wasn't condescension or strategy. This was genuine respect for what she brought to the partnership. They spent the afternoon refining their presentation, practicing their pitch until they could deliver it seamlessly. Elena found herself falling into an easy rhythm with Marcus, their different strengths complementing each other in unexpected ways. When she got excited about a particular wine, he helped her articulate why it fit their concept. When he got too technical, she grounded the explanation in terms regular diners would appreciate. Time, Patricia announced. Elena and Marcus exchanged a look of mutual satisfaction. Whatever happened in the judging, they'd created something they were both proud of, a wine program that honored the restaurant's values while remaining accessible and exciting. The presentations took place in the Chateau's conference room, with teams given 15 minutes to pitch their concepts to a panel of judges that included restaurant owners, wine directors, and industry critics. Team after team presented solid professional wine programs, good selections, reasonable pricing, competent explanations. Elena felt her confidence wavering as she listened to polished presentations from candidates with years of fine dining experience. Team 4, Elena Rossi and Marcus Chen. They took their positions at the front of the room. Elena's mouth was dry, her hands slightly shaky, but when she looked at Marcus, she felt steadier. They'd practiced this. They knew their material. More importantly, they believed in what they'd created. Marcus opened with their concept overview, explaining how the wine program would support the restaurant's farm-to-table mission. His delivery was smooth, confident, professional. Then Elena took over, walking the judges through specific selections and explaining their reasoning. For our rosé offering, we chose this wine from Paso Robles, she said, holding up a bottle. The producer uses dry farming techniques, which means lower yields, but more concentrated flavors. It's made from Grenache grown in limestone soils that give it beautiful minerality, and the color comes from just 8 hours of skin contact, enough to give it substance without overwhelming the delicate seafood dishes on the menu. She could see the judges taking notes, nodding approvingly. When Judge Hendricks asked about the pricing strategy for their premium selections, Elena felt completely in her element. We structured the high-end options to tell stories, she explained. This Barolo from a small producer in Piemonte, yes, it's expensive, but we're not just selling wine. We're selling the experience of tasting something made by the 5th generation of a family that's been perfecting their craft for over a century. When someone orders this, our servers will share that story, making the price feel like value rather than extravagance. The questions came fast after that about storage service, staff training, wine, and food pairing recommendations. Elena and Marcus fielded them as a team, their answers building on each other in a way that felt natural and unrehearsed. Thank you, Patricia said finally. We'll announce results this evening. Walking out of the conference room, Elena felt a strange combination of relief and exhaustion that came after pushing yourself beyond what you thought possible. That was, Marcus started, then shook his head. Elena, that was incredible. The way you talked about the wines, you made them come alive. We made them come alive, Elena corrected. I couldn't have done that without your foundation work. They were standing close together in the hallway, the adrenaline of the presentation creating an intimacy that had nothing to do with wine and everything to do with shared accomplishment. Elena became aware of how Marcus was looking at her. The way his eyes had darkened was something that went beyond professional admiration. Elena, he said softly. I know. She stepped back, creating necessary distance. I know, but we can't. Not now. Not while we're still competing. Marcus nodded, understanding, flickering across his features. After this is over, we'll see. Results came faster than expected. Patricia gathered the remaining candidates in the Great Hall as the sun was setting, painting the room in golden light that reminded Elena of the first morning she'd arrived. The following teams will advance to tomorrow's final challenge, Patricia announced. Team 2, Catherine Morrison and David Park. Team 4, Elena Rossi and Marcus Chen. Elena felt her knees buckle with relief. They'd made it to the final 4. Everything she'd worked for, every sacrifice she'd made, had led to this moment. But as the other candidates offered congratulations and commiserations, Elena realized that advancing meant something else entirely. Tomorrow she and Marcus would no longer be partners. They'd be competitors again, fighting for a prize that only one of them could win. The thought should have filled her with determination. Instead, it left her feeling hollow, like she'd already lost something precious before the final battle had even begun. That night, Elena called her mother one more time. For once, her mother answered the phone herself, her voice clear and present in a way it hadn't been for weeks. Elena, sweetheart, how's your competition going? I made it to the finals, Mom. Tomorrow's the last day. Oh, honey, I'm so proud of you. Her mother's voice was warm with genuine emotion. I knew you could do it. You've always had such a gift for understanding what makes wine special. I learned that from you. Elena said, tears threatening. All those evenings when you'd taste wine and tell me stories about where it came from, what the winemaker was thinking when they made it. Those were good times, her mother said softly. Some of my clearest memories. Even now, when everything else gets fuzzy, I can still remember the taste of that Brunello we shared on your birthday, the one that reminded us both of Dad. Elena's breath caught. Her mother remembered, not just the wine, but the connection, the meaning behind it. Mom, I want you to know, whatever happens tomorrow, this whole experience has been about honoring you, about proving that the passion you gave me is worth something. Oh, sweetheart, you don't need to prove anything. You just need to be yourself. That's always been enough. After they hung up, Elena sat by her window looking out at the vineyard one last time. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, she'd face Marcus across a competition that would determine not just the winner, but what their relationship could become afterward. But tonight, she was exactly where she belonged, carrying her mother's love and wisdom into the most important day of her professional life. The final challenge would test everything: technical knowledge, palate, service skills, and the ability to think under pressure. Elena had fought her way from 14th place to the final four, proving that passion and dedication could compete with pedigree and privilege. Now all that remained was to show the wine world what Rossi women were truly made of. The morning of the final challenge dawned with crystalline clarity, the kind of perfect California day that made everything look like it belonged in a magazine. Elena woke before sunrise, her body humming with nervous energy that no amount of deep breathing could calm. Today, four candidates would become two, then one. Today, everything she'd worked for would either come to fruition or slip through her fingers like wine poured too quickly. She dressed carefully in her navy blazer and black slacks, the same outfit she'd worn on the first day. It felt like armor, now familiar and protective. In the mirror, she saw someone she almost didn't recognize, still herself, but transformed by 5 days of pushing beyond every limit she'd thought she had. The breakfast room was quieter than usual. The four remaining candidates, Elena Marcus, Catherine Morrison from Seattle, and David Park from Chicago, sat at separate tables, each lost in their own pre-competition rituals. Catherine reviewed notes with mechanical precision. David stared out the window, his usually animated face unusually serious. Marcus read something on his phone, his expression unreadable. Elena couldn't eat. She sipped coffee and tried not to think about the fact that in 12 hours this would all be over. Good morning, finalists. Patricia Williams entered the room, carrying herself with the gravity of someone about to oversee something momentous. Today's challenge will test everything you've learned, everything you are as wine professionals. It's a three-part final that will push you to your absolute limits. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over them. Part 1, a blind tasting of 8 wines, the most challenging you've faced. Part 2, you'll each be given a mystery wine and 30 minutes to research its producer, vintage, and story using only the resources available in our library. Part 3, a live presentation to our panel of master sommeliers and industry leaders where you'll defend your identification and tell the wine story as if you were recommending it to a table of discerning guests. Elena felt her heart rate spike. 8 blind wines. Research under pressure. A presentation to the most demanding audience in the wine world. This wasn't just a test of knowledge, it was a test of grace under fire. The candidate with the lowest combined score will be eliminated after Part 2, Patricia continued. The remaining 3 will compete in Part 3 for the championship. Any questions? Silence. Then let's begin. The cellar had been transformed once more, this time with only 4 stations set up with surgical precision. 8 glasses waited at each station, covered and numbered alongside water crackers and notebook. The lighting was perfect. The temperature controlled the atmosphere, charged with the kind of tension that preceded life-changing moments. Elena took her seat, station 2, between Catherine and Marcus, and tried to center herself. 8 wines. Everything depended on what was beneath those covers. You have 20 minutes per wine, Patricia announced. Begin with wine number 1. Elena lifted the first cover and immediately knew she was in trouble. The wine was almost colorless, so pale it looked like water with the faintest hint of green. She brought it to her nose and found nothing, or almost nothing. The aromatics were so subtle they seemed to disappear the moment she tried to identify them. Think she told herself, what makes a wine this neutral? She tasted it, and the answer hit her like a revelation. This wasn't neutral, it was pristine. Clean as mountain air, with a razor-sharp acidity and mineral notes that spoke of ancient soils and obsessive winemaking. The finish was long, despite the wine's apparent simplicity, lingering with a saline quality that made her think of sea spray. Muscadet, she wrote. Loire Valley. This is what purity tastes like. Wine, too, was the opposite extreme, so dark it was almost black, with aromatics that leaped from the glass like wild animals. Cassie's, leather, tobacco, cedar. On the palate, it was massive, tannic enough to strip paint, but with a core of fruit so concentrated, it bordered on the supernatural. Young Cabernet Sauvignon, she decided. Napa Valley, probably from the valley floor. 20 or 2020. This wine is built for eternity. She moved through the flights methodically, letting each wine tell its story. A Riesling that tasted like liquid rock candy balanced on a knife's edge of acidity. A Pinot Noir so ethereal it seemed to float across her palate like silk. A Champagne with mousse so fine it felt like drinking stars. Wine 7 nearly broke her. It was red, medium-bodied, with aromatics that seemed familiar yet impossible to place. Cherry, yes, but also earth and roses and something indefinably exotic. She tasted it again and again, chasing an identification that danced just beyond her reach. Trust your instincts, she heard Marcus's voice from that first night. She closed her eyes and let the wine speak to her without the interference of analysis. Suddenly she was transported not to a vineyard, but to her mother's kitchen 3 years ago, when her mother had opened a bottle for a special dinner and exclaimed over its beauty. Nebbiolo, she wrote, but not Barolo. This has the grape's signature rose and tar notes, but it's more approachable, less austere. Langhe Nebbiolo, possibly 2017. Wine 8 was the cruelest challenge yet. White golden with aromatics that seemed to shift every time she returned to them. Honey, yes, but also stone fruit and flowers and something indefinably complex. On the palate, it was rich, but balanced, sweet, but not cloying with an acidity that kept everything in perfect harmony. Elena stared at the wine, her mind racing through possibilities. The color suggested age or noble rot. The sweetness pointed to dessert wine. But the balance, the complexity, the way it seemed to evolve in the glass. Late harvest Riesling, she finally wrote. German, possibly Mosel. The balance of sweetness and acidity is too perfect for anywhere else. Time. Elena set down her pen and flexed her cramped fingers. Around her, the other candidates looked equally drained. Catherine was reviewing her notes with machine-like efficiency. David stared at his last wine like it had personally offended him. Marcus sat perfectly still. His notebook closed, his expression serene. 30-minute break, Patricia announced. Then we moved to part 2. Elena escaped to the courtyard, needing air and space to process what had just happened. She'd given her best effort, but 8 wines was brutal. There were at least 2 identifications she wasn't confident about, and in a competition, this tight uncertainty could be fatal. Rough morning. She turned to find Marcus beside her, looking as composed as ever, despite what they'd all just endured. That Nebbiolo nearly killed me, Elena admitted. Marcus's eyes widened slightly. You identified it as Nebbiolo. Langhe Nebbiolo. Why did I went with Sangiovese, Chianti Classico. Marcus shook his head. Your identification makes more sense, actually. The rose notes were too prominent for Sangiovese. Elena felt a flicker of hope. If Marcus had missed one that she'd gotten right, maybe she had a chance after all. The dessert wine, she asked. German Riesling, you same. They stood in comfortable silence, 2 competitors who'd somehow become something more complex than rivals. Elena was acutely aware that one of them might not make it past the next round, that this could be one of their last peaceful moments together. Elena, Marcus said softly, whatever happens today, I know. She met his eyes. I know. Part 2 took place in the Chateau's library, with each candidate assigned to a different section and given access to wine reference books, vintage charts, and producer databases. The mystery wine sat before Elena like a riddle waiting to be solved, a white wine with golden color and complex aromatics that suggested both age and careful winemaking. She had 30 minutes to research everything about this wine, the producer's history, the vintage characteristics, the vineyard's reputation, the winemaking techniques that made it special. Then she'd have to present her findings as if she were selling the wine to guests who'd never heard of it. Elena approached the wine systematically, starting with the basics. The color suggested either age or oak influence. The nose showed honey and stone fruit, but also mineral notes that spoke of limestone soils. On the palate, it had weight and richness balanced by crisp acidity. White Burgundy, she decided. Probably Chardonnay from the Côte de Beaune. She pulled reference books looking for clues in the wine's character. The mineral notes suggested premier cru vineyards. The balance of richness and freshness pointed to a producer who understood restraint. The vintage seemed recent enough to show fruit, but old enough to have developed complexity. Then she found a description of 2018 Meursault Premier Cru from Domaine Rouleau that matched every note she'd tasted. A producer known for biodynamic farming and minimal intervention winemaking. A vintage that had produced wines of extraordinary balance and aging potential. Elena spent the remaining time researching everything she could about Domaine Rouleau, the family history, their farming philosophy, what made their wines distinctive. She scribbled notes about the 2018 vintage, the specific vineyard, the winemaking techniques that created such purity and elegance. Time digesting, Patricia collected their research materials, leaving them with only their notes and the wines they'd been studying. Elena felt confident about her identification, but the real test would come in the presentation round. Before we proceed to the final presentations, Patricia announced, "I need to inform you of the results from parts 1 and 2 combined." Elena's stomach clenched. This was the elimination round. Someone's journey ended here. Catherine Morrison, your combined score places you fourth. Thank you for an exceptional competition. Catherine nodded gracefully, shaking hands with the other candidates before gathering her things. Elena felt a pang of sympathy. Catherine had been technically flawless throughout the competition, but perhaps too clinical, too focused on correctness over connection. Our final 3 candidates are Elena Rossi, Marcus Chen, and David Park. You'll have 15 minutes each to present your mystery wine, followed by questions from our panel. The order will be determined by your combined scores from the first 2 rounds. Elena's heart hammered as Patricia consulted her notes. David Park will present first, followed by Marcus Chen. Elena Rossi, you'll present last. The significance wasn't lost on Elena. Presenting last meant she'd scored highest in the previous rounds, a position she'd never imagined achieving when she'd arrived 6 days ago as the underdog, with everything to prove. David's presentation was solid but uninspired. He'd correctly identified his wine as a Sancerre, provided accurate information about the producer, but failed to make the wine come alive. His delivery was nervous, his passion muted by pressure. Marcus took the stage with characteristic composure. His wine was a Barolo from a prestigious producer, and he spoke about it with the kind of deep knowledge that came from years of formal study. His presentation was flawless, technically perfect, informative, professional. But Elena noticed something in the judges' expressions. They looked impressed, but not enchanted. Marcus was giving them exactly what they expected, nothing more. Then it was her turn. Elena approached the podium with her glass of Meursault and her hastily scribbled notes. Looking out at the panel of master sommeliers and industry legends, she felt the weight of every moment that had led her here, every wine she'd tasted with her mother, every shift at Murphy's Wine Bar, every sacrifice that had brought her to this stage. "This wine," she began, "is a love letter written in Chardonnay." She saw several judges lean forward, interest sparked by her opening. 2018 Meursault Premier Cru from Domaine Rouleau, she continued. "But to understand this wine, you need to understand the family behind it. The Rouleaus have been making wine in Meursault for 4 generations, and what makes them special isn't just their Premier Cru vineyards or their biodynamic farming. It's their philosophy that wine should be a transparent expression of place and time." Elena lifted her glass, letting the light catch the golden color. "Look at this color, honey and amber, but with that bright edge that speaks to the wine's acidity. This is what happens when you let Chardonnay express itself honestly without manipulation. No heavy oak to mask the fruit, no excessive lees stirring to create artificial richness. Just pure expression of limestone soils and a winemaker's restraint." She tasted the wine, taking her time, letting the moment breathe. On the palate, you get everything Burgundy should be: power and elegance in perfect harmony. The 2018 vintage gave these wines incredible concentration, but the Rouleau style keeps everything in balance. You taste the minerality that comes from vines rooted in limestone that's millions of years old. You taste the precision that comes from a producer who sees their role not as wine creator, but as wine translator. Elena paused, meeting the eyes of the judges. But here's what makes this wine truly special. It's not trying to impress you. It's trying to transport you. One sip, and you're standing in a Meursault vineyard at harvest time, feeling the morning mist in the warmth of stones that have been storing sunlight since before the Romans planted vines here. She took another sip, her confidence growing with each word. This is why we do what we do as sommeliers. Not to show off our knowledge, but to help people connect with something larger than themselves. This wine represents 4 generations of family dedication, thousands of years of viticultural evolution, and the simple magic that happens when human skill meets natural beauty. Elena set down her glass and looked directly at the panel. If I were serving this wine to guests, I wouldn't start with technical specifications. I'd tell them they were about to taste history, passion, and the kind of honesty that's become rare in our world. I'd tell them this wine will make them understand why people fall in love with Burgundy. The silence that followed felt eternal. Then Judge Hendricks smiled, not the polite expression that she'd seen throughout the competition, but genuine appreciation. Questions for Ms. Rossi, Patricia asked. What made you approach this wine as a story rather than a technical analysis? One of the master sommeliers asked. Elena took a breath. Because wine is story, every bottle contains the narrative of a place, a year, a family's decisions. Our job isn't just to identify what's in the glass, it's to help people understand why it matters. Technical accuracy is important, but connection is what turns a wine service into a memorable experience. How did you develop this philosophical approach? Another judge asked. From my mother, Elena said simply. She taught me that wine isn't about impressing people with knowledge, it's about sharing something beautiful with them. Even now, when her memory is failing, wine still reaches her because it speaks to something deeper than facts. It speaks to emotion, to experience, to the part of us that remembers what beauty feels like. The questions continued, but Elena felt herself settling into a rhythm. This wasn't an interrogation. It was a conversation about wine, about passion, about the deeper meaning of what they all did for a living. When it was over, she walked off the stage, feeling completely drained but oddly peaceful. She'd given everything she had. Win or lose, she'd honored her mother, her journey, and her own truth about what wine meant. The 3 finalists waited in the chateau's library while the judges deliberated. The silence was thick with exhaustion and anticipation. David paced. Marcus sat perfectly still, his eyes closed. Elena stared out the window at the vineyard where she and Marcus had walked just a few nights ago, when the world had been simpler and competition hadn't yet complicated her feelings. Whatever happens, David said suddenly, we should be proud. We made it further than 57 other candidates. Speak for yourself, Marcus said with a tired smile. I'm planning to be devastated if I lose. Elena laughed despite the tension. At least you didn't start this competition ranked 14th. Look where you ended up, Marcus pointed out. Highest score going into the finals. That's not luck. Before Elena could respond, Patricia appeared in the doorway. It's time. They walked to the great hall in silence, their footsteps echoing off stone walls that had witnessed a century of wine history. The judges were seated at a long table, their expressions giving nothing away. Elena's mouth was desert dry, her heart hammering so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. This has been one of the most competitive championships in our history, Patricia began. All 3 of you have demonstrated exceptional skill, knowledge, and passion. You should be proud of what you've accomplished. Elena braced herself for the results, knowing that her life was about to change one way or another. However, there can be only one national sommelier champion. The winner demonstrated not just technical mastery, but the ability to connect with wine on a deeper level and to share that connection with others. The winner understood that our role as sommeliers is not just to serve wine, but to serve the experience of wine. Patricia paused, her gaze moving across the 3 candidates. The 2024 National Sommelier Champion is Elena Rossi. The words hit Elena like a physical blow. For a moment, she couldn't process what she'd heard. Champion. She was the champion. The girl from Portland who'd learned wine tasting in a storage room had just won the most prestigious competition in American wine service. The room erupted in applause. David and Marcus were immediately beside her, offering congratulations that seemed genuinely warm, despite their own disappointment. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, her hands shaking as Patricia placed the winner's medal around her neck. Speech, speech, someone called out. Elena approached the microphone on unsteady legs, looking out at the assembled judges, coordinators, and chateau staff who'd made this week possible. I don't know what to say, she began, her voice shaky with emotion. 6 days ago, I was the amateur among professionals, the outsider who didn't belong. I almost left after the first night because I was so sure I didn't deserve to be here. She took a breath, steadying herself. But I learned something this week. Wine doesn't care about your pedigree or your formal training. Wine only cares about your passion, your willingness to listen, and your desire to share something beautiful with others. Every person in this room understands that. Every person here has felt that moment when wine transcends technique and becomes pure connection. Elena looked directly at Marcus, who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. This competition taught me that excellence isn't about being perfect, it's about being authentic. It's about bringing your whole self to what you do, including the parts that make you vulnerable. She pulled out her phone and held it up. I need to make a phone call, Mom. Mom, it's Elena. I won. I actually won. Even through the phone's speaker, everyone could hear the joy in her mother's voice. Oh, sweetheart, I knew you could do it. I'm so proud of you. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. Everything I know about wine, about passion, about fighting for what matters, I learned it from you. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Later, after the champagne and congratulations and endless photos, Elena found herself alone in the courtyard. The reality of winning was still sinking in the $500,000 prize money that would secure her mother's care. The title that would open doors she'd never imagined, walking through the validation that her journey had been worth every sacrifice. Congratulations. She turned to find Marcus approaching, still in his formal clothes, but with his tie loosened and his hair slightly mussed. He looked tired but genuinely happy. Thank you, Elena said. Marcus, I need you to know. You deserved it, he interrupted. Your presentation was extraordinary. You made that wine come alive in a way I never could have. That's not what I was going to say. Marcus studied her face in the moonlight. What were you going to say? Elena took a breath. I was going to say that winning feels incomplete without you. That somewhere in the middle of this competition, you stopped being my rival and became something more important. Marcus stepped closer. Elena, I know it's complicated. I know we're from different worlds. But this week, when we worked together, when we walked through the vineyard, when you convinced me not to give up, that felt more real than anything else that's happened. It was real, Marcus said softly. It is real. So what do we do now? Marcus reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers. Now we see what happens when we're not competing against each other. Now we find out if what we built here can survive in the real world. Elena looked down at their joined hands, at the metal around her neck, at the vineyard stretching out before them in the moonlight. I have to go home to Portland, she said. I have to take care of my mother, figure out what comes next. I know. And I have to go back to San Francisco, probably disappoint my father by turning down yet another opportunity to join the family business. But, Marcus smiled, the expression transforming his entire face. But Portland's only a few hours' drive from San Francisco. And I happen to know some excellent wine bars in Portland that might benefit from a consultant with my particular expertise. Elena laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. Are you offering to help me spend my prize money? I'm offering to help you build something extraordinary, a wine program that honors your mother's memory and your own vision, something that connects people the way you connected with at Merceau today. Elena looked at this man who'd somehow become central to her story, who'd seen her potential when she couldn't see it herself, who'd helped her understand that excellence and authenticity weren't opposites, but partners. Is this how love stories usually end in wine country? She asked. I don't know, Marcus said, pulling her closer, but I know how this one begins. He kissed her, then soft and sweet, under the Napa Valley stars, tasting of champagne and possibility and the promise of stories yet to be written. When they broke apart, Elena rested her forehead against his breathing in the scent of vineyard air, and the man who'd helped her discover that some competitions are won not by defeating your rivals, but by finding the person who makes you want to be better than you ever imagined possible. So, she said softly, what happens next? Marcus smiled. Now we find out what vintage we can create together. And as they stood together in the moonlight, surrounded by vines that had been growing for generations, Elena realized that she'd found something even more valuable than victory. She'd found her partner in both wine and life, someone who understood that the best stories, like the best wines, only get better with time. The competition was over. The real adventure was just beginning. Epilogue: 1 year later, the Murphy's Wine Bar renovation was finally complete. Elena stood behind the new bar, polishing glasses that caught the light from windows Marcus had convinced her to expand. The space looked completely different, still warm and welcoming, but with an elegance that spoke to serious wine appreciation. "Nervous?" Marcus asked, adjusting his tie in the mirror behind the bar. "Terrified," Elena admitted. "What if no one comes? What if Portland isn't ready for what we've built here?" Marcus took her hand, the gesture now as natural as breathing. "Look around, Elena. Look what you've created." The wine list they'd developed together told the story Elena had always wanted to tell: small producers, sustainable farming wines with soul and personality. The food menu was simple but perfect, designed to complement rather than compete with the wine. Everything in the space spoke to their shared philosophy that wine service should be about connection, not intimidation. "Ms. Rossi." Elena turned to find a young woman with nervous eyes and a worn backpack, holding a resume and shaking hands. "I'm Sarah. I called about the server position. I don't have much experience, but I'm passionate about wine, and I promise I'll work harder than anyone." "Stop," Elena said gently. "Tell me about the last wine that made you feel something." Sarah's eyes widened, then softened, as she began describing a bottle of Riesling she'd shared with her grandmother. Elena listened, recognizing herself in the young woman's enthusiasm and hunger. "You start Monday," Elena said. "Marcus will train you on our list, but I'll teach you about service, about reading people, about making connections, about honoring the stories that wine tells." After Sarah left, practically floating with excitement, Marcus pulled Elena into his arms. "You know what that was," he said. That was you passing on what your mother gave you, what this competition taught you. The circle continues." Elena kissed him, tasting the future they were building together, complex and nuanced, with a finish that promised to linger for a lifetime. In the distance, her phone buzzed with a text from the care facility. "Your mother is having a wonderful day. She asked me to tell you that her Elena makes wine sing." Elena smiled, looking around the space that bore her mother's influence in every carefully chosen detail. Some victories were measured in medals and prize money. Others were measured in the legacy you left, the connections you fostered, the way you helped people discover beauty in unexpected places. She'd won the competition, but more importantly, she'd learned that the best sommeliers, like the best in wines, were defined not by their pedigree, but by their ability to bring people together around something larger than themselves. The sign outside read "Rossi Wine Bar," where every glass tells a story. Tonight they'd find out what stories Napa Valley had taught Elena and Marcus to tell.